Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Somebody needs to do that.
Yep,
Great, thanks.
yep.
Oh, he did. So I just left it that. I haven't read it yet. Have you read it? Yeah, I watched it.
Am I enjoying it too much? It's too much.
Theo was in a murder trial.
Yeah, they're in Fort Ira right now. They've been calling 3 up at a time. We normally do about 18 at a time. They're going 3 at a time. What's that Gardner lady? Allegedly choked that lady to death.
Okay.
Do y'all have Frank Charles?
Excuse me, everyone, we're going to get started.
That's what.
He's at my school.
Yep.
Wampus cats and devil dogs duking it out right now. Duking it out right now.
In what?
Football.
Pre-season.
7-on-7? Oh,
No,
preseason.
son, they're lining up 11 on the side,
Go Cats.
busting heads.
Good evening, everyone. We proceed each council meeting with a word of prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd like, please feel free to join us. Father in heaven, we bow humbly in your presence, Lord. We thank you for this great nation. We thank you for this great state, this great city. You have blessed us beyond thought, Lord. We thank you. Pray that you bless our decisions tonight and continue to bless this city. For us in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
See you drop. Now call this meeting to order. Mr. Garrett, would you call roll, please?
Mr. Hawkins?
Here.
Mr. Grimes?
Here.
Miss Miller? Mr. Ledbetter?
Here.
Miss Smith?
Here.
And Miss Isby?
Here.
You should have received copies of the July 24th, 2018 council minutes. Any corrections, comments, or changes?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as submitted. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 6-0. Next up, we have our report of our standing committees, starting with Community Development. Mr. Hawkins, this is you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First item on this portion of the agenda is consideration to approve reappointment of members to the Health Facilities Board. And the people with reappointments to the board are Jack Bell, Robin Scott, Jamie Gates, Fletcher Smith, and Mike Garrett. And I move that we accept those reappointment of those members to the Health Facilities Board.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the nominations for the Health Facilities Board. Any further discussion?
Do these fall under the Blue Ribbon Committee or not? Did anybody
I do
find
not
out?
know. I don't think so on this one, Mary, but I was supposed to check that and I didn't. I don't think this one does.
Okay, just double checking.
And the terms on this, Mr. Mayor, are staggered. Mr. Bell his term expires August of 2019. Robin Scott, August 20. Jamie Gates, August of 21. Fletcher Smith, August of 22. And Michael Garrett, August of 23. So they don't all come to fruition at the same time.
I think the Blue Ribbon Committee was on our major boards, and this one only meets when it's necessary for something
Okay,
like this.
just double checking, just make sure.
All right, Mr. Garrett, would you call the vote, please?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
6-0. Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is resolution accepting the bid for Seaman Morgan Road Half Street Improvement Project Phase 2 for the Community Development Department. And Kiara, hi. How are you? We're doing well, thank you.
Hey, Kiara.
Good. So before you just have the resolution to approve the low bid for Jay's Construction. For the rest of the Stephen Morgan project, it's gonna add additional parking, sidewalks, and drainage. So I just need your.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this resolution. Any further discussion? If you haven't driven by in a while, you should do it. They're really moving some dirt out there.
Right.
Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
6-0.
Another good Ward 2 project.
Mr. Hawkins.
Final item here, Mr. Mayor, is an ordinance adopting regulations to govern the construction, installation, maintenance, and removal of small wireless communication facilities in the right-of-way for the city of Conway. And we have an ordinance to read for this item. It's ordinance 01880.
Make a motion to waive 3 readings.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Patrick, would you like to explain to everybody what we're talking, or Mr. Clausen?
Yeah, I think I was nominated to be the spokesperson on this. This is kind of the culmination for Conway for about a 2-year project. There's several folks in the audience that have put a lot of hard work into that, one of which being Brian Patrick, Jason Carter, Bill Bethay, Greg Dell, and Brett Carroll. I've got some folks from AT&T and some other companies that have put in a lot of work in doing this. And basically what this is a regulation we're asking you to adopt by reference in the ordinance that kind of sets standards for these small cell wireless facilities coming in. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about moving data because now cell phones are the way that everybody kind of communicates and transfers data and connects with the world. The old style of the cell towers, or either looking like a cell tower or attaching to a water tower, or the ones that look like a flagpole are kind of going by the wayside. The next wave is basically smaller radios, smaller antennas, and saturating the areas. And what this does is regulate their access to our right-of-ways. It addresses not only permitting, the process for that, the communication between Conway Corporation and Conway, but it also the placement within the cities, again, the access to the right-of-way, pole attachments, so where they're going to be, not only which pole, but where on the pole to keep safety kind of one of the top factors when we're looking at this. The aesthetics, these things, as we over the last 2 years, the technology's kind of caught up with us a little bit, whereas we started talking about huge cabinets down at the base of these poles, and now we have something the size of a junior high locker, on here with an arm that's no more than like 48 inches long and sticking out. I think they'll be almost virtually unnoticeable as they go through, but it covers maintenance and repair and what's required by these companies. It prevents speculating. We're not going to have people coming in and claiming a bunch of poles and then charging for space on them. They have to be FCC licensed companies, or companies that are working for those or approved by those companies to be able to go through the permitting process. And it also deals with some cost recovery. This puts a lot of responsibility on Conway Corporation and the city to not only deal with these applications, go over the engineering, approve placement, do inspections and sometimes re-inspections of these small cell, they call them facilities, but you can see the diagram that's listed in it's shown. And so those are the kind of things that we were trying to get ahead of. And I think that we've done a pretty good job of that. There's been multiple meetings and conference calls and versions of the regulation that you have before you. And I think that we've come up with something that not only allows for everybody that wants to do business in Conway and do these kinds of things to have an expectation of, but also allows, it's a regulation that Conway can manage, and Conway, with the help of Conway Corporation, obviously. So we'll take any questions, and there's several folks in here that are far better qualified than I am to answer them if you have any.
Will it just be any poles moving forward, or what about any existing? Is there any?
So there's,
What's-
I don't know, you can get up here, Jay. This is Jason Carter, former city attorney, North Little Rock. North Little Rock has passed a version of basically the identical regulation on this. Pole is defined in the regulation, and it covers several things, but basically what you think of is utility pole or a traffic signal pole. It's kind of the two that we're really focusing on. And I'll let
Okay.
There can be streetlights as well, but the important purpose of the regulation is to protect the aesthetic quality of the keep things looking nice, but also to get people the service they need. It seems more and more we have this appetite in society for data speed. It's ever growing, it's ever consuming. And now this new thing called the Internet of Things. I'm not even sure what that is, but I just know it needs lots of data. And the industry's answer has been these new small cell devices as opposed to the large cell towers. This regulation will govern the placement of those small cell devices within the right-of-way. outside of the right of way, it doesn't govern it. I think that's the way, and appreciate the hard work of Conway Planning, with Brian and the work they did to make sure that we kind of delineate what can and what cannot be done. But it is important to do it well, to do it right, and I think we've done a lot of effort in the trenches to make sure that we've done that and balanced those interests.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did I
Yeah,
answer the
yeah, I didn't know,
specific
like,
question?
existing towers that are all over the place, those will all remain
They'll remain, I mean, they still have certain uses, but this is kind of what's
moving forward,
And-
okay.
And, so streetlights, there's some make-ready work that's allowed for in here, and certain specifications they have to meet. There's a different permitting process for that, each one of these that are kind of unique or their own. You can see the fee, as far as the permits, attachments, right-of-ways, those are all in the regulation. And so, again, those are more or less cost recovery for all the work that we have to do, to carry that. But that's like Jason said, I mean, we're protected, we're allowing this to come in, but protecting the aesthetics of the community. We don't want these things just hanging all over and they all look,
Popping up
really
everywhere.
different and, they're distracting. We want them to come in and kind of integrate with our existing aesthetic appeal that we have, in and around the community.
Maybe I'm thinking too much here, but he mentioned this regulates it on public property. Is there any application to this on private property? Can I rent out my flagpole to one of these small cell providers and have one?
On private property, it'd be treated just like a cell tower application.
Okay, so it'd have to come through.
Whatever general rules of
Okay.
that you have for that right now, those rules would apply.
Okay,
Yes, and we do have a process for
Yeah.
that, and they would have to follow that
Okay.
process as well, based on the definitions in our zoning.
yeah, thank you.
Make
I'd
them,
just like to add to, with working with Conway staff and Conway Corporation, it's really been great. You've got a great staff, great professionals in this community. Really enjoyed it, really impressed with it, even with Chuck. I've been very impressed with the staff and professionals you have in this community.
Conway Corporation has been a good partner with us for a long time.
Well, this guy did the lion's share of the work. I mean, he was kind of the architect of the agreement from the beginning, and we could not have done this without him. He's got unbelievable wealth of knowledge when it comes to this type of regulation, and it's been invaluable.
Thank you very much.
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
I make a motion,
For everything he did.
make a motion to waive the 3 readings.
We've three.
Did we do
readings.
that already?
Yeah.
I make a motion for the adoption of the ordinance and the emergency clause.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance with emergency clause. Any further discussion?
There's a lot of heavy hitters out here that might want to check in on this. Now's the time.
Brett, do you want to weigh in on anything?
Anybody?
Okay. Any further discussion?
I just didn't want to get y'all away from supper and not say anything.
Mr. Garrett?
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
And the emergency clause, Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
What was the ordinance number on that?
It was 01880.
80.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Next up, we
Thank
have our
y'all.
Public Safety. Yes, thank you,
y'all.
gentlemen. Next up, we have our Public Safety Committee, and first thing is we have consideration to approve a bid for dozer undercarriage replacement for a John Deere dozer at Sanitation Department. Ms. Bryce, I think you're speaking to this.
It clears the room.
Yeah, it really does.
You got caught in the crowd there, didn't you?
Good evening.
We received 3 bids to
Thought they'd be here for this.
replace the donor at sanitation.
Maybe they can-
And I'm asking you to approve the lowest qualified bid. If you'll look at the bid tabulation, I know it's not the lowest as dollar amount, but the other ones did not meet specs. The second lowest bid withdrew their bid, so that's the lowest one we have. And I'll tell you, they really did, they came close, because the one that didn't meet specs did not include a part that was $12,000 to $14,000.
Ooh.
So if you'll add
Wow.
that part in, they're about the same amount.
That wasn't just a piece of rubber either, was it?
No, it-
It's kind of like fixing a fire truck. Everything's expensive.
Make a motion that we approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept this bid. Any further discussion?
You've got no problem if somebody asks you a question as to why we took the third bidder on that? Okay, thank you. That's all I needed to hear.
Mr. Garrett?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
6-0. Thank you, Jamie. Next up, we have a resolution approving the purchase of residential waste and recycling carts for the sanitation department. Are you speaking for Mr. Hopper's been ill for the last couple of days, so he can't be here. Go ahead, Jamie.
So these carts are, the ones that we're replacing are 20 years old. They come with a 10-year warranty, but they usually last 15 to 20 years, and we're on a schedule to replace them, and that's what this is. And we're asking, the department did receive 3 quotes, so we're within reason on our price, and we're asking to follow the contract on U.S. Communities Procurement Co-op.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the resolution for the purchase of the waste and recycling carts. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett?
Be Resolution R 1830. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
That's 6-0. Thank you, Jamie. Next up, we have Mr. Clausen discussing the engagement letter from the Thrash Law Firm.
This is litigation that we've been asked to join in on. This is also something that we've been kind of monitoring for a while. There's been some headlines about, sales tax online and things like that. This is the one that kind of hits us in the A&P realm, and in essence, all these online booking for hotels, motels, hotels.com, and some of the more common ones that you're aware of. Orbits, I think, is one of them too. Whatever they are. But anyway, there are many of them that are listed. There's several communities and cities that are ones that have A&P commissions that are included in this lawsuit already. And once we were contacted, once it was the right time to get in to this particular lawsuit, this is what I'm asking to do. We've already had the A&P commission vote and approve to enter in, but I wanted to make sure that we had the blessing from the city council. What will in essence happen from this point, if approved, is that some paperwork will be filed on our behalf, and then once any funds or funding or settlements are made, settlement offers, then we'll figure out how much we're owed. So we have minimal effort into this thing, and hopefully we'll reap the benefits of collecting taxes that we were due over a period of time.
We know how far back this might go, Chuck?
Well, that's a good question. It's more than likely going to be 5 to 6 years
But it's just for bookings that occurred online, is that right?
here. And the way that I understand they're gonna calculate damages are gonna be based on not necessarily our specific data, but they have kind of an algorithm that they're gonna figure out. That way they don't have to do is, dive into as many specifics in our community. But we are one of the largest communities in the state, and I would assume probably get one of the larger shares, once this thing's worked out. But I'll come back to you once I know some more information.
Good.
I'll be in contact with the attorneys once I send the engagement letter in, if it's approved, and hopefully we'll get good news.
Good.
Everybody okay with that?
Do you need anything from us?
Other than just a voice vote to approve me, signing this document.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve entering this. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
6-0. Next up, we have Mr. Clausen discussing the Rains versus City of Conway.
I got a little help on this one. John Wilkerson from Municipal League is representing us in this matter, and I'll kind of let him take it and help out where I can.
Evening, everybody. Every time I talk to the city council, I want to make sure to remind you I am a Wampus cat and a Crook bear. Always good to be back home, and always a privilege to help y'all out. I'm here to convey an offer in the Rains case. John Rains, if anybody remembers this at all, but John Rains, behind the Dairy Queen between Donaghy and Meadow Lake, I think in the Plaza Point Apartments about 5 years ago. John Rains had.
Could you click your mic on?
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
John Rains, there's a call out to the police department that Mr. Rains had stabbed his roommate, and his roommate was hiding in the closet, so the cops need to come pretty quickly. Police officer showed up. Mr. Rains was outside with the knife in his hand, waving it from side to side. And then when Andrew Birmingham, Stephen Culliford, and Jess Burrows showed up on scene along with other officers, when Rachel Hansen, a fourth officer, tried to approach Mr. Rains with her taser drawn, he started to step towards her, and the officers felt that her life was in danger. She felt her life was in danger, and they shot Mr. Rains. He was not killed. He is paralyzed from the chest down or stomach down. So the officers have been sued for excessive force, shooting when it wasn't reasonable and justified to do so, and the city has been sued as well for failing to train its officers on how to deal with mentally ill suspects or mentally ill individuals. Mr. Raines was schizophrenic, and the plaintiffs say that he was having a mental crisis at the moment. That's up for debate, but it doesn't matter really. The fact is he was shot by the police officers as he approached another officer with the knife. It is on video. The video I thought would be very telling. I think that it still is very telling. But the lower court has said this needs to go to a jury trial. The Eighth Circuit, I appealed that decision to the Court of Appeals, which is right below the Supreme Court, and the Eighth Circuit agreed and said it needs to go to a jury trial. And right now, and they said there's a question of fact as to whether or not John Raines posed a threat to Officer Hansen. I think it's very clear from the video that he did. But the courts have so far agreed, and it means we have to go to a jury trial on this case. I have petitioned the Supreme Court for review. I think that this is an issue that should have been dealt with without need for a jury. It's very clear on the tape or the video that Mr. Raines steps towards the officer, and my opinion is that in this state, if you step towards an officer with a knife raised towards that officer, then the officers are justified in using deadly force to stop the threat. I will tell you the bad parts of the case, too, since I'm conveying a settlement offer. I want to make sure you have as many of the facts as possible. I'm not necessarily trying to litigate the entire thing right now, but I will answer any questions that you have to the extent that I can't answer them without giving away our strategy, which is really pretty obvious. He had a knife and he came towards us. One of the officers, Stephen Culliford, fired 3 extra rounds while Mr. Raines was on the ground. I will tell you that all 21 shots occurred within 3.6 seconds. And so the extra 3 shots, one was as Mr. Raines was falling, and 2 were immediately thereafter. So it wasn't bang, 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 he falls, bang, bang, bang. It was bang, 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 bang. It was all right then. And the courts have Supreme Court has been very clear that just because you can't stop shooting and you shoot after the threat is so on and so forth, or quote unquote over, then it's not necessarily a violation of the law, because the human condition isn't, you can't train yourself to stop that quickly sometimes. And Mr. Culliford did shoot a few extra times. I don't think that it was excessive even then. Mr. Raines still had the knife in his hand, still within proximity to Officer Hansen, but that is one of what Mark Hayes calls the fuzz in the case. Another piece of fuzz in the case is that Officer Culliford had dealt with Mr. Raines the Friday before, although he didn't know it. Mr. Raines had a mental health crisis on the Friday before the Sunday shooting. Officer Culliford didn't know him, didn't recognize him either on Friday or when they showed up to the scene on Sunday. But the plaintiffs have said, well, Mr. Culliford, or Officer Culliford, knew he was mentally ill, and he should have done something different. But I tell you, under my opinion, and I think the law agrees, that the knife trumps all. You know, when you're facing a loaded gun, what difference does it make if the person on the other end is mentally ill or not? And I'll say this too, they did everything that they could, these officers did everything that they could to ratchet down this situation. They told Mr. Raines, drop the knife. First they asked him what's going on. You okay? He wouldn't drop the knife, drop the knife. Drop the knife or we'll shoot, drop the knife, and he just wouldn't drop the knife. So I say all that to say this, and I'm, as always, extremely proud to represent my hometown, and I'm extremely proud to do it in this case as well. I'm also extremely proud to represent these officers. I've done this for a long time, and there's been a lot of officers that are great officers, but these officers are some of the best. And your department is an absolutely I wouldn't say perfect. No, nobody's perfect, but it's darn near as perfect as you can. Well-run police department. Y'all are incredibly well trained. You hire great officers. They're officers that have great restraint. And this is, and I have a police expert that has looked at this case. The way these officers handle this situation is textbook. This is exactly how you do it. And were it not for the actions of John Raines, I wouldn't be here today. And that's our strategy at trial. I'll tell you the offer from the plaintiffs is $1 million or nothing. They'll take $1 million and not a nickel less. For y'all, that means, because you have coverage through the league, that it's 10%. So you would be on the hook to settle this for $100,000. Mark Hayes, I can tell you the league is not interested in settling this case. I'm not interested in settling the case. But I have to come to you, make sure you all are understanding of the facts, and make sure you have an educated decision on your hands. But I absolutely do not recommend settling this case for $1 million, and I can't imagine settling it for any amount of money. But I want you to know the good, the bad, and the ugly of this case. One more thing that Chuck and I have talked about, and I want to address with you as well, because the city is sued and the officers are sued, that means a couple of different things. If the city somehow loses at trial, which would require the officers to lose and then the city lose, the city would be on the hook for 10% of whatever judgment that comes their way, right? Except if it exceeds $1 million, because that's the coverage limit for the municipal league, you're on the hook for any number above $1 million. So if it's a $1.5 million judgment, we're going to pay $900,000. The other $600,000 is for y'all, and you're the city, you have to pay that judgment. The officers have the same coverage as far as $1 million. You've already agreed that you're going to cover them, and you're going to pay 10% of whatever amount that you either settle for, which I don't encourage you to do, or if it comes to pass that the trains go off the track and end up in Mars, that we lose this case, which is a possibility. We could lose. Then the officer, you're to pay the officers money, amount of damages as well. But again, that will not exceed $100,000 because that's 10% of the total million that you have. So what Chuck and I want to talk to you about real quick, well, before I do, Chuck, I want to make sure that everything I said about the officers and what happened.
Right. So I think John did a great job of articulating exactly kind of our stance and our assessment of the case. I mean, this is obviously a very difficult situation for any officer to be in, but the three that were there, the ones that are on trial or going to trial, that have been sued, did it by the book. They did what they're supposed to do. They did what was expected of them. They gave this person every opportunity to make a different decision, and they shot in defense of another officer. And so, yes, absolutely, I believe that they were justified in taking the actions that they did, and they're to be commended for it. Unfortunately, they ended up getting sued for it.
So the one thing I want to talk to you about real quick, the officers are nervous, as you can tell, as you can imagine. Anybody would be, especially when you're going to trial on something like this. And I've told them that the city has their back. I mean, the city said that they did the right thing per training. Nobody has yet Chuck has not made any mention that anybody is in any way critical. Well, everybody should be critical of an officer involved shooting, let me get that straight. But critical to the point that you think that these officers did anything wrong. And of course, they would like to know that as well. And I think from the shakes of the heads, I think I'm getting that feeling from them. One bridge I would like to talk about building, although we're not there yet, obviously, is what happens if the city wins and the officers lose $2 or $3 million. The municipal league will not cover more than $1 million of that. And then, of course, y'all cover the $100,000 of that million. Beyond that, it's on their own. What I would like to encourage you to do, and I will cross this bridge when we come to it. If the officers get popped for $2, $3 million, I will come back to you and encourage you to back these officers up. I know it'll be expensive, but I've done this long enough to know that police officers really care about what the city thinks about them. And if they know a city has their back, it's going to make them better officers. It's going to make everybody a better officer because this is a hard situation, and you want your officers to keep running into that building when there's an active shooter or dealing with someone that has a knife and may have a roommate bleeding to death in the apartment. And so, no decision has to be made now, but I would like to talk to you about that. And again, I see some head nods, but that's what I will come back and ask you if we lose. I may be crying a little bit because I'll be sad that we lost, but I will ask that of you, and I hope.
I would be supportive of that. If we get to that point and we come back, I would definitely be recommending that we support these officers. They have to know that when they're out there making split-second decisions and relying on their training and doing what they're supposed to do and being good officers, representatives, civil servants, that they're actually supported by the city, that we have their back, and that's exactly what I would recommend as strongly as I can.
Yeah. Chief Ledbetter and I worked on the street with them for over 30 years, and they always had our back, and they were always good at what they did, and they got my support.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Where would a jury trial be held?
Little Rock.
What is our potential exposure?
Well, I don't think it's very high.
I mean, you
but
just threw out 2 or 3 million. I mean, that's pretty high. Could-
potential exposure monetary?
Yes, yeah,
Oh,
monetary
yeah.
exposure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What's the potential monetary exposure?
Oh, I think 2 or 3 million's on the high end, way high end, by the way. I don't, that would be difficult for me to, but that could happen. He's got what's called a life care planner, which it's somebody that looks at you and says, hey, you know, you're gonna be worth $4 million because you have a college degree or because you have a good job or whatever it is. And they're claiming that he's worth 2-point-something million dollars.
Well, $100,000 is a lot less than that.
It is.
Make it all go away, and everybody can sleep at night, those officers and everybody can sleep at night.
If we go that route, does that end it for the officers and everybody?
It would end it. If I may pull back from the ledge just a second. If you want to go that route and negotiate a settlement, I would not ask you to accept $1 million. I would ask that you give me authority to explore that, if you want to go that route. But again, I'm not suggesting that you should explore settlement. But to your point, that's what I would recommend.
Would we open ourselves up for future lawsuits if we just settle and, you know, I mean, I don't know.
There's always, you know, the
Always.
possibility, you know, if we did this, there would be releases for the officers personally, but it still goes on the record. They're concerned about the perception if they were to continue their law enforcement, you know, career somewhere else. So yeah, there's factors to take into play, but you're absolutely right. 100,000 is a lot less than
It is.
2.7, which at most, you know, again, this is not, but 1.8, if they gave the full amount is what we were.
I mean, and, you know, I'm talking about this not knowing anything more, as you just told me. I don't,
Right.
you know, but.
I should add one other.
It's obviously 900,000 to the municipal league, but as far as this body, it's $100,000 to be done with it. Just devil's advocate.
No, it's fair. I mean,
That's fair.
that's why we're trying to have this, that's why I want to have this discussion now.
We're
that
getting ready to
rather than-
spend $4 million, $5 million here of the next item, borrowing some of it. I don't know where we'd get 2.7 more.
I can say this, I can speak for the officers as well. Jason Owens is also representing them. They're not, they want you to have their back. They're worried about the perception, but I don't think anybody's gonna get in the way if y'all decide you do want to settle it. I mean, now, Mark Hayes in the municipal league, they may have a different attitude towards it, but, you know, I'm just here to do what y'all would like, what the officers would like, and they would not oppose it. Don't get me wrong. Well, they wouldn't like it, but, you know, nobody's gonna get in the way if y'all decide to go that route. It's a fair point.
Is this just a civil suit?
Yes.
No criminal suit?
No
Civil
criminal.
suit?
No, the prosecutor cleared them.
So if we won the suit, it would exonerate them from the record and all that? If they won and we, you know, the city won and they weren't sued or liable personally, would it go away from their record and their
Well,
personal-
they're always gonna have the record of having shot somebody. I mean, there's no getting around
Can't
that.
you structure a settlement where there's no admission of?
Yeah, of course.
That's what.
Yeah, that's a standard. Yeah, I'm sorry. I always forget about that. Yeah, the standard is, there's gonna be no admission of liability. You know, we didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
As this thing moves forward, would there possibly be more chances for settlement?
I don't think anybody's gonna turn down $1 million check. So yeah, I think that there's
I
always,
think it will.
If it
To
gets
open it
closer,
up.
the price might come
Come-
down.
Oh, yeah.
right. I mean, again, we've got the Supreme Court. The chances of that are slim to none, obviously, but it is slim. So there's a chance that we could win at the Supreme Court, you know. But as it stands right now, we're going to trial November 29th.
So,
November?
Right.
That's what I thought you said.
So I guess maybe some clarification on what their options are at this point.
Right. So you can move to reject the offer outright. You could not do anything and leave it open, I guess, in a way. You could move to have me continue or I guess really start negotiations. Although again, the plaintiffs have said it's $1 million or nothing, but I could certainly, you know, talk to them about it. And I think that's really the only options that we have, right? I don't think there's anything else, so.
My first inclination is to move forward with the trial. I mean, that's just me personally. I don't know
Yes.
how
Well,
everybody else
and
feels.
to give you confidence too, in that particular option, I mean, we have two of the best lawyers in the state representing the city. I mean, the municipal league does a great job. Mark Hayes is very involved in this case, and I can tell you can have all the confidence in the world with Mr. Wilkerson.
Thank you.
Just don't like the perception it would send if we settled.
Oh, definitely, 100%.
That's the conversation that
Yes.
we've had quite a bit,
Right.
because like I said, we've had not only our assessment of the video and the
Right.
reports and all that, the officers did what they're supposed to do by our expert, you know.
Right.
Right.
In police tactics and,
I think it's important for us to show the police officers that we do have their back,
We stand behind them, 100%. I mean, it's,
especially when they're in the right.
Well, I can take the message here and,
Is that a motion?
I'll make that motion.
second.
We have a motion and a second to proceed
Enough of
with
us here.
the jury trial, is that correct?
Is there enough of us here to vote, I guess, and do?
Well, we got 6.
5,
On-
right?
On this one, let's do a show of hands. All those that are in favor of proceeding, raise your right hand, please. Any opposed?
I thought you were tricking us. I was like,
Right hand.
"Ah,
Okay,
all right,
so we will proceed then.
all right, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.
appreciate it, man.
All right. Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Grimes. That was a fair concern. It was.
And that is a conversation we've
Right.
had.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. All right, next up, we have the consideration to approve the offer and acceptance for property located at 111 Main Street. Mr. Winningham, if you would come up. Our offer was the original price was $4.2 million. We negotiated, we're at $4 million. There's some good news in all this. We shouldn't, and if y'all choose to go this route, we will not have to borrow any money. We'll get $1 million and some change out of selling our building. We'll take $3 million from the sanitation department. That'll pay for our building. We figure top end's gonna be $1 million on renovation. That we don't, yeah, it's a solid building, and we can take that from our reserve fund. We've got a little over $2 million in reserves, and we have about $4 million right now that's unencumbered, that's in the general fund. So as a city, we're in a place that we hadn't been in a while, and I appreciate all y'all hard work and the department heads and the people who shop in Conway. A lot of good things have happened to us. But if you would like to discuss some other funding options, Mr. Winningham can explain those to you. But other than that, I'd like to take a motion to buy it. But if you got, I'd really like for you to talk to Mr. Winningham on his, if you have any concerns about borrowing money, or if y'all'd rather go that route. The way we're talking about doing now, we don't have to borrow any money on a 5-year loan, nor do we have to bond anything.
I just want to make sure we replenish that reserve at
Right.
a pace to get that back up. That was our intent, to kind of leave it for things like this.
Or
It's a
what
good-
just came up
Yeah,
before.
Right.
Perfect.
That's with
Yeah.
the 2 million.
Yeah. I mean,
The-
it's
But yeah, this is the time to spend it, then build it back up to the 2
Right.
million,
just
so yeah.
250 a year if we have to, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, we did
Yes.
500 for 4 years
Yeah.
to get it there.
Doing the
but-
bond issue is still an option. It just becomes very hairy in this case because that building has tenants. And the post office, in all likelihood, will be in that building forever. And when you have tenants, you cannot do tax exempt bonds on that building. So we would essentially have to do a taxable bond issue, which would be more expensive.
Even when it's governmental?
And we can't,
These claims are not governmental.
start working on it until the 2 tenants are out.
One of the tenants who occupies the largest space is going to move out as soon as, I'm sure they're watching this meeting, and if it's approved tonight, they're gonna start the process moving the one upstairs. Nabho's will start negotiating with them to see if they can move it. If not, they're,
So they're gonna allow them to break the lease.
their lease
and leave.
expires
Okay.
October of next year, so it's not gonna hold us up, because it's a small area.
You said it wasn't very many.
Yeah,
what,
3,500
3,000?
square
Yeah.
feet,
Yeah.
something like that.
That won't be.
So the two private tenants are the ones we're referring to that gives us
Yeah, not-
issues
not
with the
the-
tax
not the,
exempt bonds.
Even
but
the
not
post office. Even the
post
post
office.
office.
Even the post office.
Yeah. So when, when the tenants move out, essentially they're gone, and that would probably release us of that taxable issue. But, I don't think anybody foresees the post office leaving unless they decide to. I don't think it's our
No.
desire to get
We
them
like them
out.
right where they are.
So
And that's
that portion of the
income
building
tax.
will always be.
By taking our reserve, we're just borrowing from ourselves. We're gonna
No,
pay
we're
back the
borrowing-
bank,
Right.
pay back
Exactly.
ourselves, we might as well pay
Right.
back ourselves out of
Yep.
reserve.
Exactly. I
But
think
we don't
it's
have
a
any
win-win.
interest on ourselves.
And there's fund balance that's
Yeah.
not,
But option,
Tied to the
option two
reserve,
looks
too.
like the best way to do it.
Yeah.
yep.
Okay.
It would be nice to own a building and not have to
Yes.
owe on
And
it.
to not pay interest.
Yeah, and a bond issue kind of makes sense when we're talking about building a new building, because the useful life is gonna far exceed, what the debt would be on it. Of course, we expect this building to last, a long time as well, but,
Right.
At least till I'm dead.
yeah, so
Oh, Lord.
2-3 more years.
That's not long, is it, Mary?
Not
Not long.
He's my
Oh,
age.
Yeah, so we've got, just verbally express this for anybody watching that doesn't know, we've got several different pools we can pull from. The mayor mentioned the $1 million that we got from Conway Corp. with the lease agreement. We've got sanitation funds that we can utilize. We've got the general fund reserve we can utilize.
How much do we have in sanitation right now, Mr. Winningham?
Total fund balance in sanitation is around $11.5 million. So they're in really good shape, cash-wise.
So even moving into next year, start some things, we would have some options there too.
Right, yeah, and if we wanted to, it's mentioned there in that first option, if we wanted to do a 5-year financing for the remodel or any portion of it, that's on the table as well. But I think we've really got the funds in-house to accomplish this, and exactly what Ms. Smith said and Mr. Grimes, we want to pay ourselves back.
How would we do that? Where would we start paying ourselves back? With what money?
It would be.
And I'm particularly interested about the $2 million reserve. I'm a little bit leery because I know what kind of bind we were in. We were all sitting here when we had to start putting that money up, and I'd just as soon not spend all of it.
Well, and we could take it out of, the unrestricted fund balance too.
Basically, what we did each year, we sequestered first
Right.
500,000 from the general fund budget to go into that. We just, over 5 years, 200,000, just
And we could do 250 for 4
250
years
for
if
4
we
years,
want to.
10 for 5
I think
years,
that would be.
So we're
fine.
only gonna use one of the $2 million?
Yeah.
That's what the proposal is?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
What would that 5-year loan, that $2 million, what would that cost us?
A 4%, it's usually what I guess on rates for $2 million. That would be,
Come on, Jeff
Pull
Rowe.
out his gun.
Make him take his shoes off, go count.
you're a finance guy when you've got a loan calculator app.
How many years out would that be for?
5 years.
Just
5
5 years,
years.
you said?
It's gonna be about $450,000 a year.
A year?
Yes, sir.
And once we close, we start collecting the rent? Is that the,
I believe
so,
that's-
We would assume the leases at closing.
okay,
that day.
so that's money that could be sequestered for
Yes.
For our reserve.
improvements?
Yes.
Well, for improvements, and then we don't have to take less from the
Being borrowed
reserve,
then.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
We could do that.
Yeah, they won't, I guess the two really won't be there that long, but
Yeah.
that income would be, income that we,
And do they complicate our lives any, given their for-profit companies?
potentially with regards to property taxes, they do.
Yes, but we're pretty confident we can regain our tax exempt status. And we only have issue with the square footage that they take up, once they leave. And it's
Okay.
open back up to, in
Okay.
essence, the public.
I just knew it complicated
It does.
things a little bit.
We feel confident in that.
Okay.
So do you need us to say which option we want to go with? Is that what we're,
I need them, is everybody okay with
option
borrowing the
two?
money
I
from
was gonna say, I
ourselves?
think David
Huh?
had mentioned
Yeah.
option two. Yeah.
Option two, yeah.
If y'all are okay with this offer, I'd like to have a motion and a second to accept it.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to accept the offer and acceptance for the property at 111 Main Street for a new location of City Hall. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Passes 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Winningham.
So tomorrow we should go take our picture in front of the new City Hall or the old City Hall, or both?
Both.
You know?
Well, thank you all. This has been a long process, and we've been back and forth a lot, but you know, it's been a good process. So we'll have a committee meeting August 28th at 5:30 on our streets projects, and to kind of catch everybody up on that. That's all we have tonight. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you all. We're
I'd
adjourned.
like to give Finley and them kudos for the roundabout.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Finley.
yes.
And all
Yeah.
the street
Finley-
department, anybody that
Finley
was
Vincent
involved
and
in
his
it.
crew did an outstanding job.